face it, police have a tough job. There are good cops and there are bad cops. And whenever a story of a bad cop emerges, it seems as though the administrators behind those cops like to use excuses like, well, there's always a few bad apples, or this is not what this department stands for, or pick an excuse. The administrators, the higher-ups, the union representatives, they all seem to find a way to dismiss it all away as some isolated random act. They say that it's just a few bad apples. Well, if it is just a few bad apples, it sure seems to me that they've got an awfully large barrel. The following video showcases several examples of some of those bad apples.
Oklahoma City police officer Daniel Holtzclaw was living a double life in late 2013 and early 2014 as a decorated veteran of the force and a sexual predator of the highest order. For over 6 months, Holtzclaw would routinely pull over women and run background checks on them. And if he found any outstanding warrants, he would coerce them into sexual favors rather than bringing them in. His luck ran out when he sexually assaulted a 57-year-old woman who had no such outstanding warrants and who promptly filed a complaint with the Oklahoma City PD. Holtzclaw was placed on administrative leave while investigators conducted a thorough auditing of all the times he had run background checks on women, then contacted those women, nearly all of whom had tales of their own to tell about Holtzclaw's predatory behavior. At his trial, Holtzclaw's attorney attempted to discredit the victims by bringing up their criminal records, but the jury found that Holtzclaw had selected his victims for this very reason. He was eventually convicted on 18 charges related to stalking and sexual assault, and sentenced to a whopping 263 years in prison.
This is in the District Court of Oklahoma County, State of Oklahoma, the State of Oklahoma versus Daniel K. Holtzclaw, case number CF 2014-5869. Verdict, count 1, sexual battery. We, the jury, impaneled and sworn in the above entitled cause, do upon our oaths find as follows. The defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery and set punishment at 8 years. Count 8. Defendant is guilty of the crime of forcible oral sodomy and punishment is set at 20 years. Count 10. Forcible oral sodomy. Defendant is guilty of the crime of forcible oral sodomy and punishment is set at 16 years. Count 11. Rape in the first degree. Defendant is guilty of the crime of rape in the first degree and punishment is set at 30 years. Count 12. Count 13, sexual battery. Defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery and punishment is set at 8 years. Count 14, sexual battery. Defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery and punishment is set at 8 years. Count 15. Count 28, rape in the first degree. Defendant is guilty of the crime of rape in the first degree and punishment is set at 30 years. Count 29, rape in the first degree. Defendant is guilty of the crime of rape in the first degree and punishment is set at 30 years. Count 32, rape in the first degree. Defendant is guilty of the crime of rape in the first degree and punishment is set at 30 years. Let me ask the jury, is this your verdict, so say you all? Mr. Holtzclaw, this jury finds you guilty of the various counts. You will be remanded to the custody of the Oklahoma County Sheriff for formal sentencing set January 21st, 2016 at 10 o'clock a.m. All right, you have a seat.
6 Philly police officers are facing serious criminal charges after there was some evidence indicating that they did really bad illegal things. Let me give you some examples. Between 2006 and 2012, the officers are being charged with beating, kidnapping, and stealing more than $500,000 in drugs, cash, and property from suspects. Now, these are specifically cops that are working for the narcotics unit, so they would do raids without warrants. Say the charges against them include stories of dangling suspects from balconies, locking them in hotel rooms, beating them as officers kept score on who could inflict the most debilitating injuries, and underreporting seizures of money and drugs. So let's say they were in a situation where they were able to obtain $64,000 worth of money, drug money, they would only report like $7,000. So what happened to the rest of it? Now, 5 of the officers are facing life in prison if they are convicted on 26 of these charges. The 6th cop, John Spicer, faces about 40 years behind bars.
We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant guilty of murder.
A former Texas police officer is now a convicted murderer. Facing the possibility of life behind bars, a jury found Roy Oliver guilty in the death of 15-year-old Jordan Edwards.
64, we're going to be out.
The fatal shooting last year was captured on body cameras worn by Oliver and his partner. They were clearing a house party in a Dallas suburb when gunfire rang out. As panic ensued, high school students fled the scene on foot and in cars. Oliver's partner ordered a vehicle with 5 black teenagers to stop.
Hey, stop that car!
As the car pulled away, Oliver fired 5 times. Jordan Edwards, a passenger, was shot in the back of the head. Oliver told the jury he thought his partner was in danger.
He was trying to hit you.
But that officer testified he never feared for his life.
A jury finding San Francisco police officer Christopher Coors guilty on 2 felony counts of hit and run. Coors, known in better times as the Hot Cop. On November 29, 2015, Coors hit 2 pedestrians just after 2 a.m. at Broadway and Montgomery Streets in San Francisco, then fled the scene.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Jason Van Dyke, guilty of second-degree murder.
The officers are former Commander Tim Leach and Detective Fred Person.
7 investigator Jim Kurtzner broke this story and joins us live with the latest from the 5th Precinct, where the police chief just spoke. Jim?
That's right, Glenda and Dave. This is a serious life-altering assault. The victim with severe brain damage, and then these allegations of the cover-up by these 2 veteran officers the prosecutor called Detroit police brass. This victim is Mike Karpovich. He was down in Corktown the day of that St. Patty's Day parade, hanging out with friends, drinking at the Ottava Via bar, when eyewitnesses say he was slammed to the floor. These 2 veteran officers, more than 40 years of experience on the Detroit Police Department, allegedly covering it up. Take a look at the specific charges. We're talking about Commander Tim Leach, assault with intent to do great bodily harm. That's the big one. A 10-year felony, tampering with evidence, working security without a license, aggravated assault, neglect of duty. And the other officer involved in this is a detective in the Detroit Police Department. He's Fred Person. Obstruction of justice, a 5-year felony. Did he stall investigators and police officers when they arrived on the scene and for a couple of days later? I'm told both of these guys wiped their cell phones clean of data, but then it has since been recovered.
3 of New York's finest now stand accused of sodomizing a man in broad daylight at a Brooklyn subway station.
It is alleged that police officer Kern took his retractable baton and shoved it into Mr. Minio's anus.
NYPD officer Richard Kern faces felony aggravated sexual abuse and assault charges, while officers Alex Cruz and Andrew Morales are charged with trying to cover up the alleged attack.
Drew Peterson was a 30-year veteran of the Bolingbrook, Illinois police force with a sterling reputation and a dark secret. In 2004, his then-wife Kathleen Savio was found dead in their home in an apparent accidental drowning in the bathtub. The results of her autopsy were inconclusive, and nobody thought to suspect the officer of foul play. That is until 2007, when Peterson's new wife, Stacy, went missing. Although her body hasn't been found to this day, the circumstances of Stacy Peterson's disappearance were suspicious enough that Savio's body was exhumed, and a second autopsy was performed. And this time, the examiner found that the body showed signs of a struggle and ruled her death a homicide. After a lengthy trial, Peterson was convicted in 2008 of the first-degree murder of his wife, drawing a 38-year prison sentence. But apparently that wasn't long enough for the killer cop. In 2016, he was charged with attempting to have Will County State's Attorney James Glasgow killed in a murder-for-hire plot. He was convicted of 2 felonies in the case and slapped with an additional 40 years in prison.
On Monday, one of those officers arrested for sexual assault involving a juvenile. 32-year-old Kyle Vaughn also facing 2 child pornography charges.
Craig Payer engaged in extracurricular activities while on duty that none of his fellow officers were privy to. He would pull over female motorists while in his marked CHP vehicle and attempt to pick them up. Extremely inappropriate, but perhaps not criminal. That is until he encountered 20-year-old San Diego University student Karen Knott, who took offense to the officer's behavior, a response that didn't sit well with Payer. He attempted to physically restrain the young woman, who fought to break free by scratching and clawing at the officer's face to no avail. Payer bludgeoned her with a flashlight, strangled her with a rope, and threw her lifeless body over an abandoned bridge. Upon her discovery, tips immediately began to pour in from other women whom Payer had approached, and the investigation quickly focused on the cop. When forensic evidence was found on the hood of Payer's car, the jig was up. He was arrested, tried, and convicted of Knott's murder, and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
These are the charges that we have had filed today, signed by one of our Superior Court judges. These are the 11 charges against Officer Roth. The first charge is felony murder. This is the death that is as a result of a underlying felony, and in this case, the underlying felony is aggravated assault. He's also charged in the arrest warrant with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and this is a count charging him for the shooting of Mr. Brooks.
Sidney Dorsey was esteemed within his department, but that particular sheriff's office had a long history of corruption, and unfortunately Dorsey was no different from his predecessors in that respect. As the 2000 election approached, Dorsey was under investigation for such abuses as assigning personal tasks to his deputies and abusing contracts with the county jail. Dorsey's opponent in the election, Derwin Brown, promised to put an end to the corruption and clean house if elected, a platform which delivered him a decisive victory over Dorsey. Whether motivated by fear of the discovery of his abuses, bitterness over his loss, or both, Dorsey decided that his defeat would not stand. He put out a hit on Brown, and just days before the victorious candidate was sworn in, he was shot 12 times and killed while standing in the driveway of his home. The investigation quickly zeroed in on Dorsey, and in 2002 he was convicted of ordering the murder of his rival and sentenced to life in prison.
As I said previously, cops have a tough job, but there sure seems to be an awful lot of bad apples in the barrel. Don't forget to like and hit that subscribe button.